My uncle worked in Antarctica for 15 years. Before he died, he told me what they found under the ice. The phone call came at 3:33 a.m. My Uncle Desmond's voice was barely a whisper, broken by wet coughing that sounded like his lungs were tearing apart from the inside. "Adrian, they know I'm dying. They've stopped watching me. I can finally tell you the truth about Vostok." He paused, and I heard machines beeping in the background, the sterile sounds of a hospice room. "But you need to come now, tonight. I won't make it to morning." I was in my car within 10 minutes, driving through empty Seattle streets toward the address he'd given me, a private care facility I'd never heard of, despite visiting him regularly for the past 8 months. The building looked wrong when I pulled up, too isolated, too heavily secured for a simple hospice. There were cameras everywhere, and a security guard at the front desk who checked my ID 3 times before letting me pass. When I finally reached Desmond's room on the 4th floor, I found him propped up in bed, looking 20 years older than his 63 years, his skin the color of old paper, and his eyes sunken but burning with an intensity I hadn't seen since I was a child. "Close the door," he said before I could speak. "Lock it. We don't have much time, and what I'm about to tell you will sound insane, but I need you to listen to everything before you decide I've lost my mind to the cancer or the morphine." He gestured to a chair beside his bed where a thick manila envelope sat waiting. "That contains copies of everything I managed to save. Photographs, documents, seismic readings, transcripts of communications that were supposed to be destroyed. I've hidden the originals in 5 different locations. The coordinates are in the envelope, encrypted, but you're smart enough to figure out my system." I sat down slowly, picking up the envelope, feeling the weight of whatever knowledge it contained. "Uncle Des, what happened in Antarctica? You've never told me the real reason you came back." He smiled, but there was no humor in it, only a deep weariness mixed with something that looked like relief. "I came back because they made me leave, and I never went near ice again because I learned what's underneath it. What's been underneath it for longer than humans have existed." He reached for a cup of water with shaking hands, took a sip, and began speaking faster, urgently, like he was racing against time itself. "February 8th, 2009. That's when everything changed. We'd spent 14 years drilling through the East Antarctic ice sheet, working toward Lake Vostok, this massive body of water 3.7 kilometers beneath the surface, sealed off from the world for 15 million years. Everyone thought it might contain unique life forms, bacteria adapted to extreme conditions, maybe something that could tell us about the possibility of life on Europa or Enceladus. The entire international scientific community was watching our progress. 14 nations had contributed funding and personnel. This was supposed to be one of the greatest discoveries in human history. Desmond's voice cracked, and he coughed again, bringing up something dark into a tissue that he quickly hid from my view. "We broke through the ice on February 5th. I wasn't there. I was in New Zealand at a conference, presenting our preliminary findings, talking about what we expected to find in the lake. While I was on stage showing slides of ice core data to 200 scientists, my team was 3 kilometers below the surface, pulling up water samples from a lake that should have been pristine and untouched." He paused, his eyes focusing on something I couldn't see, some memory that still terrified him 15 years later. "They pulled up something else with the water, something that made 3 of the drill team claw their own eyes out within the first hour, something that made 2 others cut their wrists with the broken edges of sample containers before anyone could stop them. The last 2 researchers just stood there, staring at what they'd brought up from the depths, until their brains shut down completely, and they collapsed into comas they never woke from. I felt my mouth go dry. What did they find? Desmond reached over to his bedside table with trembling hands and pulled out a photograph, old and creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. He handed it to me, and I looked at what appeared to be a grainy image of a water sample container, and floating in the murky liquid was something that made my brain hurt trying to process its shape. It looked like metal, but the geometry was wrong, angles that seemed to fold into dimensions that shouldn't exist, surfaces that were simultaneously reflective and absorptive, a structure that my eyes kept sliding off because they couldn't find a stable point to focus on. "That's one of 12 artifacts that came up in the initial sampling," Desmond said quietly, "and that's the smallest one, the one that killed the least people." I stared at the photograph, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be real. This has to be doctored, some kind of optical illusion or camera malfunction. Desmond laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That's what I said too, for about 30 seconds, until I saw them in person, until I felt what they do to you just by being near them. They emit something, Adrian. Not radiation or electromagnetic fields or anything we have instruments to measure. They emit information, vast quantities of data being broadcast continuously, and human nervous systems aren't designed to receive it safely. Being near them is like trying to drink from a fire hose, except the hose is connected to something infinite and your brain is the size of a thimble. He took the photograph back from my hands, which I noticed were shaking now. The drill team, these were experienced researchers, people who'd spent years in Antarctica, some of the most stable and professional scientists I'd ever worked with. Within 2 hours of exposure to these artifacts, 5 of them were dead by their own hands, and 2 were vegetables. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Whatever these things are, just being near them drives humans insane. But you survived, I said, trying to find some logic in this nightmare he was describing. You were there? You saw them? You're still sane enough to tell me about it. Desmond's smile was bitter and sad. Am I? I've spent 15 years seeing things in reflections that shouldn't be there, hearing sounds and white noise that form words in languages I don't know, waking up with knowledge in my head that I never learned. The cancer, Adrian. The pancreatic cancer that's killing me right now. I didn't get it from bad luck or genetics or environmental exposure. I got it from being near those artifacts for 3 days before they evacuated me. The specialists who came to seal the site, they wore protective suits that looked like they were designed for something far worse than biological contamination. They said the artifacts emit a form of energy that breaks down cellular structures at a molecular level, causes mutations and failures in living tissue. Everyone who was at Vostok Station during those 3 days after the breakthrough has either died or is dying. I'm the last one left. He pulled his hospital gown aside slightly, and I saw his chest, covered in marks that looked like burns, but arranged in geometric patterns, the same impossible angles I'd seen in the artifact photograph. These started appearing about 6 years after I left Antarctica, Desmond continued, covering himself again. At first, just small patches on my arms and legs, like birthmarks or rashes. The doctors couldn't explain them, couldn't even classify what kind of tissue damage they were, but they spread, slowly, following patterns that matched the geometry of those artifacts. And about 3 years ago, I started understanding what the patterns meant. They're not random damage, Adrian. They're maps, coordinates, instructions. He reached for the envelope in my lap and pulled out a folded piece of paper, spreading it on the bed between us. It was covered in drawings, intricate geometric designs that hurt to look at directly, the same impossible angles and folding dimensions as the artifact. This is what the patterns on my skin are telling me. This is what the artifacts were broadcasting from 3 kilometers below the ice. They're not artifacts, Adrian. They're markers, beacons. They've been down there for at least 15 million years, buried under the ice sheet, waiting, and we woke them up by drilling through. I stared at the drawings, feeling something in my head that I didn't like, a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like my thoughts were being pulled toward the patterns against my will. Waiting for what? What are they marking? Desmond's eyes filled with tears, and I realized this was the first time I'd ever seen my uncle cry. This man who'd spent decades in the harshest environment on Earth without showing fear or weakness. There are structures beneath the lake, Adrian. Massive structures that extend down through the bedrock for kilometers. Geometric formations that are too precise and regular to be natural geology. We'd seen them on seismic surveys but thought they were unusual mineral deposits or volcanic formations. But after the artifacts came up, after the specialists arrived, they showed me enhanced data that proved those structures were artificial, built, constructed by something with intelligence and technology far beyond what humans have achieved. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving wet streaks on his paper-thin skin. The specialists, they weren't scientists. They were military, some kind of international task force that apparently exists specifically to deal with discoveries like this. Findings that challenge fundamental assumptions about Earth's history and human development. The woman in charge, she told me things they don't teach in any university, things that are classified at levels most governments don't acknowledge exist. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. What kind of things? Desmond leaned back against his pillows, his breathing labored, and I could see each word was costing him energy he didn't have to spare. She said Lake Vostok isn't unique. There are similar formations beneath ice sheets all over the planet. Greenland, the Arctic, parts of Tibet and the Andes, wherever ice has persisted for millions of years. All of them have the same characteristics. Liquid water that's warmer than it should be, geometric structures in the bedrock below, and these artifacts scattered throughout the water like seeds or spores. They've known about most of these sites since the 1960s, discovered them during Cold War submarine operations and aerial surveys. Multiple nations have drilled into some of them, always with the same results. Artifacts that broadcast information humans can't safely process, researchers who die or go insane from exposure, and rapid international cooperation to seal the sites and suppress any public knowledge of what was found. He coughed again, longer this time, and when he finally stopped, there was blood on his lips. The woman, her name was Director Kensington. She told me the structures are at least 65 million years old. They predate the extinction of the dinosaurs. They were already ancient and buried when the first mammals were evolving. The timeline was impossible. Contradicted everything I thought I knew about planetary history and evolution. That can't be right. There were no civilizations 65 million years ago, no intelligent life on Earth except maybe some advanced dinosaurs, and even that's speculative. Desmond smiled again. That same sad smile that suggested he'd once thought exactly the same thing. That's what I said. Kensington just looked at me like I was a child who'd finally noticed the sky was blue. She said the structures weren't built by Earth life, weren't created by any species that evolved on this planet. They're archives. Massive data storage facilities built by something that passed through our solar system during the late Cretaceous period. And they didn't just pass through, Adrian. They stopped here. Deliberately. They buried these archives under locations that would be covered by ice during Earth's glacial cycles, preserving them against erosion and geological change. The ice sheets are natural protection, keeping the structures intact and isolated until what? Until something happens. Until someone finds them. Until the time is right for whatever purpose they serve. I realized I was gripping the arms of the chair hard enough to hurt my hands. What purpose? What are they storing? What information is worth building structures that last 65 million years? Desmond reached for my hand, and I felt how cold his fingers were. Like he'd already started dying from the inside out. That's what the artifacts show you. That's what the broadcast contains. And that's why everyone who experiences it either dies or wishes they had. Because the information isn't just data, Adrian. It's knowledge about what Earth really is, about what humans really are, about why we're here and what's coming. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. The drill team, before they died or went catatonic, 2 of them managed to write things down, fragments of what they'd learned. The specialists confiscated everything, but I took photographs before they could stop me. I've spent 15 years trying to decipher those notes, trying to understand the fragments without exposing myself to the full transmission. And I've figured out enough to know why they're so desperate to keep this secret, why they've killed people to prevent this knowledge from spreading. He released my hand and pulled another document from the envelope. This one covered in handwriting that looked like it had been done by someone with severe tremors, letters shaking and overlapping, words scratched out and rewritten, entire paragraphs spiraling into illegible scrawls. This was written by Dr. Natasha Volkov, one of the Russian researchers on the drill team. She had a PhD in molecular biology and had published over 50 papers in top-tier journals. This was written 90 minutes before she opened her own wrists with a scalpel. I took the document with numb fingers, looking at the chaotic writing but unable to make sense of most of it. But certain phrases jumped out, crystalline and clear despite the surrounding madness. They didn't leave. They're sleeping. Wake cycle begins when planetary conditions match origin parameters. We are the alarm clock. We are the trigger. We are so fucking sorry. I looked up at Desmond, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. What does this mean? What's sleeping? What wake cycle? Desmond's eyes were closed now, and his breathing had become more labored, each inhale rattling in his chest. The structures aren't just archives, Adrian. They're more than data storage. They're cocoons, hibernation chambers. Whatever built them, whatever traveled through our solar system 65 million years ago, some of them stayed behind, buried themselves beneath the ice, and the structures are keeping them preserved, maintaining their biological or technological or whatever functions they need, until conditions are right for them to wake up. The room felt like it was tilting, my sense of reality sliding sideways as I tried to process what Desmond was telling me. You're saying there are aliens frozen under Antarctica, under other ice sheets around the world, and we woke them up by drilling into Lake Vostok? Desmond opened his eyes, and the look he gave me was full of pity and regret, and something else, something like inevitability. Not frozen, sleeping. There's a difference, and we didn't wake them. Not yet. The artifacts are warning systems, designed to activate when the ice is penetrated, to broadcast information about what's beneath and what will happen when they fully awaken. The drill team received that broadcast directly, all at once, and it destroyed them, because human brains can't hold that much information, can't process the implications. But fragments got out, pieces of knowledge that people like me have been studying for 15 years, trying to understand the timeline and what we're supposed to do about it. He coughed again, harder, and this time he couldn't stop it, his body convulsing as he tried to clear his lungs. When he finally caught his breath, his voice was barely audible. The wake cycle has already begun. It started when we drilled through. The artifacts activated, the structures beneath the ice started warming up, drawing geothermal energy from the planet's core, preparing for whatever comes next. How long? I asked, my voice sounding distant and strange in my own ears. How long until they wake up completely? Desmond smiled one last time, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. According to the fragments Natasha wrote, according to the patterns appearing on my skin, according to calculations I've done based on the energy signatures Kensington's team detected, we have about 15 years, maybe less if climate change accelerates ice sheet melting, if we drill into more of the sites, if we trigger additional wake signals. He pulled his hand away from mine and placed it over his heart, where the geometric patterns were most concentrated. I'm dying now because I was exposed. The radiation or energy or whatever the artifacts emit, it accelerated cellular breakdown in everyone at Vostok. But I've lasted longer than any of the others because I understood enough to minimize my exposure, because I got out before the full activation. Most of the drill team died within 5 years. I've made it 15. His breathing was getting shallower, his words coming slower. But Adrian, that's not why I called you here. Not just to tell you what's coming, but to tell you what you need to do about it. He gestured weakly to the envelope still in my lap. Everything in there, all the documentation I've gathered, the photographs of artifacts, Natasha's notes, seismic data showing the structures, testimony from researchers who survived other drilling sites, it all needs to be made public. The specialists, Kensington's organization, they've kept this secret for decades because they believe public knowledge would cause panic and social collapse. But they're wrong. People deserve to know. Humanity deserves time to prepare, to decide collectively how to respond. instead of having that decision made by a handful of shadow governments and military committees. He reached up and grabbed the collar of my shirt, pulling me closer with the last of his strength. They're watching me because they know I'm dying, but they don't think I'll tell anyone because I've been compliant for 15 years. They think I'm broken, too scared to act. But I called you because you're a journalist, because you have the connections and the platform to make this story reach people who can do something about it, and because you're family, and I trust you with this burden more than anyone else in the world. His grip loosened, and his hand fell back to the bed. Promise me. Promise you'll release everything, no matter what pressure they put on you, what threats they make, what offers they extend. This is bigger than both of us. This is about species survival. I looked at the envelope in my lap, at the dying man in the bed before me, and felt the weight of a choice I'd never asked to make. Uncle Des, if I publish this, if I go public with claims about alien structures under Antarctica and sleeper beings that are waking up, they'll destroy my credibility. They'll call it conspiracy theory nonsense, discredit every source, make me look insane. And if what you're saying is true, if there really are people powerful enough to suppress this for decades, they'll do worse than destroy my reputation. They'll make me disappear. Desmond nodded, tears streaming down his face now, carving channels through the hollow spaces of his cheeks. I know. I've thought about that every day for 15 years. Wondering if I should have spoken up earlier, if I should have sacrificed myself to warn people. But I was a coward, Adrian. I chose to live quietly and die slowly rather than fight. And now I'm running out of time, and the wake cycle is progressing, and someone needs to do what I couldn't. Someone needs to be brave enough to tell the truth, even knowing what it will cost. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. But I won't force you. The choice is yours. Walk away, burn the envelope, forget everything I've told you, and live your life in ignorance until whatever's sleeping beneath the ice wakes up and changes everything anyway. Or carry this burden, become a target, potentially sacrifice your career and safety and peace of mind, but give humanity a chance to know what's coming before it arrives. The machines around his bed started beeping more urgently, and I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, nurses or doctors responding to the alarms. We were out of time. Desmond's eyes were starting to close, his breathing turning into desperate gasps as his body finally gave up the fight it had been losing for months. I stood up, clutching the envelope, and looked at my uncle one last time. I'll do it, I said, not knowing if he could still hear me. I'll tell your story. I'll release everything. I promise. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the sound of the door bursting open and medical staff flooding into the room. But I saw what he mouthed, saw the final message he wanted to give me before whatever came next. Check the ice. It's melting faster than they're telling anyone. You have less time than you think. And Adrian, I'm so sorry for everything that's about to happen. Then the nurses were pushing me aside, working to stabilize him, and I was being ushered out into the hallway by a security guard who appeared from nowhere, a tall man with cold eyes who said I needed to leave immediately, that visiting hours were over, and Mr. Hallowell required privacy for his medical procedures. I was halfway to the elevator when I heard the flatline alarm, that steady electronic tone that meant Desmond was gone. I stopped, turned back toward his room, and saw through the small window in the door that the nurses had stepped back, weren't attempting resuscitation, were just staring at his body with expressions I couldn't read from this distance. The security guard put a hand on my shoulder, not rough but firm, guiding me toward the elevator with inexorable pressure. You need to leave now, sir. This area is restricted. I looked at him more carefully, and noticed things I should have seen earlier, the way he moved with military precision, the bulge under his jacket that suggested a concealed weapon, the communication device barely visible in his ear. Who do you work for? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't get a real answer. Hospital security, sir. Please step into the elevator. I did, clutching the envelope against my chest, and as the doors closed, I saw the guard pull out his phone and speak into it. 3 words that confirmed everything Desmond had told me. The nephew has it. The drive back to my apartment felt like it took hours, though the clock on my dashboard said only 33 minutes had passed. I kept checking my rearview mirror for vehicles following me, seeing every car as a potential threat, every pedestrian as a possible observer. When I finally pulled into my parking garage, I sat in my car for 10 minutes just breathing, trying to organize the chaos in my head into something coherent and actionable. Desmond was dead. I was holding documents that allegedly proved the existence of alien structures buried under Antarctic ice for 65 million years, and people with enough power to suppress this information for decades now knew I had those documents. The smart move would be to destroy everything, burn the envelope, delete any photos from my phone, go home, and pretend this night never happened. But I'd made a promise to a dying man, and more importantly, if even half of what Desmond told me was true, humanity deserved to know what was coming. I pulled out my phone and started recording a video, just in case something happened to me before I could release the information properly. My name is Adrian Hallowell. I'm a freelance journalist based in Seattle. 3 hours ago, my uncle, Dr. Desmond Hallowell, glaciologist and former research lead at Vostok Station in Antarctica, died of pancreatic cancer. Before he died, he told me about what the international research team found when they drilled into Lake Vostok in February 2009. and why the project was abruptly terminated despite decades of preparation and billions in funding. What I'm about to tell you will sound like science fiction, but I have documentation that I'll be releasing through multiple channels to prevent suppression. I took a breath and continued. In 2009, when the drilling team penetrated the ice sheet and reached Lake Vostok 3.7 kilometers below the surface, they brought up more than water samples. They recovered 12 artifacts, objects of clearly artificial origin that had been submerged in the lake for an estimated 15 million years. These artifacts emit some form of energy or radiation that broadcasts information directly into human neural tissue, and exposure to this broadcast caused severe psychological and physical trauma to every member of the drill team. 5 researchers died by suicide within hours of exposure. 2 others fell into comas they never recovered from. My uncle spent the last 15 years dying slowly from cellular damage caused by his exposure to these artifacts during the 3 days before the site was sealed and classified. I held up the envelope so it was visible in the frame. This contains documentation that my uncle preserved, including photographs of the artifacts, testimony from surviving researchers, seismic data showing massive artificial structures beneath Lake Vostok, and translated fragments of the information broadcast by the artifacts. According to these sources, the structures aren't just archaeological remnants. They're active systems, maintained over millions of years, serving as preservation chambers for whatever built them. I paused, knowing that what I was about to say would make me sound insane to anyone watching, but committed to following through. The artifacts are warning beacons, designed to activate when the ice is penetrated, to broadcast information about what's sleeping beneath and what will happen when thermal conditions reach specific parameters. According to calculations based on the fragments recovered, and on patterns of cellular degradation observed in exposed researchers, the entities or systems preserved beneath Lake Vostok and similar sites around the world will become active within the next 15 years, possibly sooner, if climate change continues to accelerate ice sheet melting. Multiple governments and an international classified organization have known about these structures since at least the 1960s and have been systematically suppressing any public knowledge while preparing for an event they know is coming but haven't shared with the global population. I looked directly into the camera, trying to project conviction I wasn't entirely sure I felt. I'm releasing this video and all supporting documentation because I believe humanity deserves to know. We deserve time to prepare collectively, to research openly, to make informed decisions about our response. The alternative is allowing a small group of officials to determine humanity's fate without public input or democratic process. That's not acceptable, regardless of whatever justifications they've created for maintaining secrecy. I ended the recording and immediately uploaded it to 3 different cloud storage services, then sent copies to 4 journalists I trusted at major publications, with instructions to release everything if I disappeared or died unexpectedly within the next 72 hours. Then I opened the envelope and started photographing every document inside, uploading each image as I went, creating a distributed backup that would be nearly impossible to completely suppress. The process took 3 hours, and by the time I finished, the sun was starting to rise over Seattle, pale light filtering through my apartment windows. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, spreading out copies of the documents, trying to organize them into a coherent narrative that would be compelling enough to break through the noise and skepticism that would inevitably greet these revelations. Desmond had included more than I'd initially realized, not just his own documentation, but materials from other sources, other researchers who'd apparently been part of a quiet network trying to understand and prepare for what was coming. There were names I recognized, scientists who died in accidents or disappeared mysteriously over the past 15 years, all of them connected to drilling projects or Antarctic research in some way. One document in particular caught my attention, a transcript of a classified briefing that Desmond had somehow obtained, dated March 2009, just weeks after the Vostok incident. It was labeled International Response Protocol, Post-Discovery Assessment and Containment Strategy. The document confirmed everything Desmond had told me, acknowledged the artifacts and structures, discussed the psychological impact on exposed personnel, and outlined a coordinated international effort to suppress public knowledge while ramping up classified research into the nature and purpose of the buried systems. What made my blood run cold was a section near the end, titled Projected Timeline and Population Impact Assessment. The briefing stated that based on analysis of the artifact broadcasts and thermal data from multiple sites, full activation of the preserved entities would occur between 2024 and 2029, with highest probability in 2027. The document estimated that activation would be globally observable and impossible to suppress or explain through conventional narratives. It recommended using the intervening 15 to 20 years to prepare infrastructure and social systems for paradigm-level disruption to human civilization. There was a casualty projection included, a cold numerical assessment that estimated between 30 and 60% of global population would not survive first contact adaptation period. I read that section 3 times, trying to process the implications. The people who'd written this document, who'd known about the structures since at least 2009, had calculated that billions of humans might die in the next few years. and they'd decided the correct response was to keep the information classified and prepare quietly without warning the population. The justification given was that public knowledge would cause premature social collapse and resource conflicts that would worsen survival outcomes. But reading between the lines, I understood what they really meant. They didn't think most people could handle the truth, thought that fear and panic would be more dangerous than whatever was actually sleeping under the ice, and they'd chosen to prioritize maintaining order and control over giving humanity a chance to prepare collectively. That decision, made in classified briefings by officials whose names were redacted, might have doomed billions of people who could have been warned, could have been given time to relocate or prepare, or at least understand what was about to happen to their world. The anger I felt was almost physical, a burning sensation in my chest that made my hands shake as I photographed this document and added it to my upload queue. My phone rang, and I nearly dropped it, my nerves already stretched past breaking after the night I'd had. The caller ID showed a blocked number, which almost made me ignore it, but something made me answer. "Mr. Hallowell, my name is Director Kensington. I believe your uncle may have mentioned me." The voice was calm, professional, female, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "I'm calling to offer you an opportunity to discuss the materials Dr. Hallowell provided before you do something that will have consequences you haven't fully considered." I felt my jaw clench. "You mean, before I tell the truth about what you've been hiding? About the people who've died to keep your secrets?" There was a pause, and when Kensington spoke again, her tone hadn't changed, still perfectly controlled. "I understand you're angry. Your uncle just died, and he shared information that challenges your entire worldview. But Mr. Hallowell, Adrian, the people who've maintained this classification aren't villains. We're not suppressing information because we enjoy power or want to control humanity. We're trying to prevent the premature collapse of civilization before we have systems in place to manage what's coming." I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised me. "By premature collapse, you mean you want to maintain order and authority as long as possible, before the truth becomes impossible to hide? You want to control the narrative when the sleepers wake up?" Kensington sighed, a surprisingly human sound. "We want to give humanity the best possible chance of survival, and our assessment, based on extensive psychological research and historical analysis of how populations respond to existential threats, is that premature disclosure will cause more harm than good. People will panic, Mr. Hallowell. Governments will collapse. Supply chains will break down. Violence will escalate. And when the actual activation occurs, when the entities beneath the ice fully wake, we'll be facing that crisis from a position of maximum chaos and minimum coordination." I looked at the documents spread across my table, at the casualty projections and containment strategies, all the cold calculations made by people who thought they knew better than the rest of humanity. Or maybe people deserve to know the truth and make their own choices about how to prepare. Maybe treating billions of humans like children who can't handle scary information is exactly the kind of authoritarian thinking that got us into this mess in the first place. Kensington was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was something different in her voice, something that sounded almost like respect. "Your uncle said you'd respond this way. He told us you'd choose principle over pragmatism. That's admirable in its way. But Mr. Hallowell, before you release those documents, I need you to understand something. The materials Dr. Hallowell gave you are incomplete. They show you what we found, but not what we've learned since. And if you go public with partial information, you'll create the exact panic we've been trying to avoid, without giving people the context they need to respond productively. Then give me the complete information," I challenged. "Fill in the gaps. Tell me everything you've learned in 15 years of classified research. Let me make an informed decision about what to release and how." I heard what might have been a smile in her voice. "That's not possible over a phone call, Mr. Hallowell. But I can offer you something better. Come to our facility, see the research we've been conducting, speak with the scientists and analysts who've dedicated their careers to understanding these structures and preparing for activation. 48 hours, that's all I'm asking. Give us 2 days to show you the full picture before you make a decision that will affect billions of people." I looked at the video I'd recorded, at the upload progress bar on my laptop showing 78% complete. "And if I agree to this meeting, if I give you 48 hours, what guarantee do I have that you won't just detain me indefinitely? That I'll actually be allowed to leave with the information I already have?" Kensington's response was immediate and certain. "You have my word, which I know means nothing to you right now. But you also have the insurance you've already created. The video you recorded, the documents you've distributed to multiple journalists with dead man switches. We're aware of all of it, and we know that disappearing you would only validate your claims and accelerate the disclosure you're threatening. We're not stupid, Mr. Hallowell. We're desperate." That last word hung in the air between us, and I realized Kensington wasn't just trying to manage me. She was genuinely worried about something beyond just maintaining classification. "Desperate how? What aren't you telling me?" Another pause, longer this time. "Come to the facility, see what we've seen, and then decide whether humanity is ready for the truth, or whether we need more time to prepare for what's waking beneath the ice. Flight information is being sent to your email now. Be at Boeing Field Private Terminal in 3 hours. And Mr. Hallowell, bring the documents, all of them, We're not trying to confiscate evidence. We're trying to give you context. The call ended before I could respond, and I sat staring at my phone, trying to decide if this was genuine engagement or an elaborate trap. My email pinged, and I saw the flight details. A private charter to McMurdo Station in Antarctica, departing at 11 a.m. I had maybe 2 hours to decide whether to take the biggest risk of my life or play it safe and just release everything I had right now. The smart choice was obvious. Upload everything immediately, create maximum redundancy, protect myself through publicity and distributed knowledge. But something Kensington had said kept echoing in my head. Incomplete information, creating panic without context, and underneath it all, that single word, desperate. I made my decision and started packing. Not just clothes and my laptop, but copies of every document, multiple storage devices with encrypted backups, and a file I prepared for my lawyer with instructions to release everything if I didn't check in within 72 hours. If this was a trap, if they were planning to silence me, at least I'd made it as difficult and costly as possible. And if Kensington was telling the truth, if there really was critical context I was missing, then maybe it was worth 48 hours to understand the full picture before making a choice that would affect billions of people. The drive to Boeing Field took 30 minutes through morning traffic, and I spent the entire time second-guessing myself, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. But when I pulled up to the private terminal and saw the sleek jet waiting on the tarmac, I didn't turn around. I grabbed my bags and walked through the terminal, past security that barely glanced at my ID, and up the stairs into a plane that was far more luxurious than anything I'd ever flown on. There were only 4 other passengers visible, all wearing civilian clothes but carrying themselves with military bearing, and they nodded politely, but didn't introduce themselves or attempt conversation. Kensington was waiting in the main cabin, and in person, she looked exactly like her voice suggested. Mid-50s, gray hair, sharp eyes that had seen too much, dressed in practical clothes that could work in either an office or a field site. Mr. Hallowell, thank you for coming. I know this requires considerable trust we haven't earned yet. I promise we'll do our best to deserve it over the next 2 days. She gestured to a leather seat across from her, and I sat down, still clutching my bag. This flight will take approximately 12 hours with 1 refueling stop in Hawaii. That gives us time to begin your briefing before we arrive at McMurdo. Are you comfortable starting now, or do you need some rest after the night you've had? I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and exhaustion was making my thoughts feel fuzzy and disconnected, but I knew I wouldn't be able to rest without getting some answers first. Start the briefing. I need to know what you think is so important that you'd fly me to Antarctica, rather than just suppress everything I have. Kensington nodded and pulled out a tablet, swiping through files until she found what she was looking for. Your uncle told you about the artifacts and the structures beneath Lake Vostok. He told you about the drill team casualties and the warning broadcasts. He told you our assessment that activation would occur within 15 to 20 years of the initial discovery. All of that is accurate, as far as it goes. But there are critical elements he didn't know, information we've gathered since 2009 through continued classified research at multiple sites. She turned the tablet toward me, showing a map of Antarctica with dozens of red markers scattered across the continent. These are confirmed structure locations, 63 sites total, all beneath ice sheets at least 2 kilometers thick, all showing the same geometric patterns in seismic data, all connected by underground conduits that span the entire continent. I stared at the map, trying to comprehend the scale of what she was showing me. 63 sites? Desmond only told me about Vostok and mentioned a few other locations. You're saying there are 63 of these hibernation chambers? Kensington swiped to the next image, a 3-dimensional model showing the structures in cross-section. Vostok is the largest, but far from the only one. And Mr. Hallowell, they're not separate installations. They're nodes in a network, all connected, all communicating with each other through the same energy emissions that damaged your uncle and the other researchers. We've been monitoring that network for 15 years, and what we've learned is complicated. She zoomed in on one of the structures, revealing internal architecture that looked more organic than mechanical, chambers within chambers, branching passages that resembled neural networks or blood vessels. The entities preserved inside aren't dormant in any passive sense. They're processing, thinking, dreaming if such a word applies. And they've been doing it for 65 million years, running simulations, observing Earth's development, waiting for specific conditions to be met before emerging. Your uncle told you that drilling into Vostok triggered the wake cycle. That's true, but incomplete. Drilling was just one trigger among many. Climate change, ice sheet melting, certain atmospheric composition thresholds, even specific electromagnetic frequencies from modern technology. All of these are inputs that the network has been monitoring, and when enough inputs align, activation proceeds automatically regardless of whether humans interfere further. I felt something cold settling in my stomach. You're saying even if we'd never drilled into the ice, they'd still be waking up? Climate change alone would be enough? Kensington nodded grimly. Climate change was always going to be enough. The network was built with that expectation. The ice sheets are temporary on geological timescales, and the entities knew that Earth's climate cycles would eventually expose their structures whether humans helped or not. They were just planning for it to take another 10,000 years, the natural end of the current interglacial period. Human industrial activity has accelerated the timeline significantly. She pulled up a graph showing temperature projections and ice loss rates. Our models suggest that even with aggressive emission reductions, Antarctic ice loss will reach critical thresholds for network activation by 2029. If current trends continue, it could happen as early as 2026. We have less than 2 years, Mr. Hallowell. Maybe 18 months. That's why your uncle said you have less time than you think. That's why we're desperate. The plane engines started, the vibration running through the floor, and I realized we were about to take off, about to commit fully to this journey whether I was ready or not. I looked at Kensington, at her tired eyes, and the lines around her mouth that suggested stress and sleepless nights. What happens when they wake up? The briefing document mentioned casualty projections, 30 to 60% of global population. What does activation actually mean? Kensington leaned back in her seat as the plane accelerated down the runway, and I saw her hand grip the armrest tightly, a small sign that she wasn't as calm as she appeared. That's the critical context your uncle didn't have, the information we've gathered through extremely careful exposure protocols and advanced imaging of the structures. What we've learned about the entities themselves and their purpose for being here. The plane lifted off, and Seattle disappeared beneath us, replaced by clouds and the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Kensington waited until we'd leveled off before continuing. The entities aren't colonizers or invaders in any conventional sense. They're not here to conquer Earth or harvest resources or subjugate humanity. Their purpose is something we didn't have words for until our linguists and anthropologists created new terms to describe it. They're gardeners, Mr. Hallowell, planetary engineers. And Earth is one of thousands of worlds they've seeded and tended over billions of years, shaping the evolution of life according to patterns and purposes we're only beginning to understand. She pulled up another image, this one showing what looked like a family tree, but with branches connecting multiple worlds, multiple species, all linked through common genetic markers and evolutionary paths. Human DNA contains sequences that don't occur naturally through earthly evolution. Sections of our genome that were clearly inserted, engineered, designed to produce specific traits and capabilities. We're not separate from these entities, Mr. Hallowell. We're their creation, and when they wake up, they're not going to destroy us. They're going to harvest. The word hung in the air between us, and I felt every horror movie I'd ever seen suddenly becoming terrifyingly relevant. Harvest? Harvest us for what? Kensington's expression was unreadable. That's what we're going to show you at McMurdo. That's the context you need before deciding whether humanity is ready for this truth. Because, Mr. Hallowell, the entities beneath the ice, they're not aliens in the way you're imagining. They're our progenitors. Our creators, and we were never meant to be the end product. We're the intermediate stage. And activation means they're ready to complete the process they started 65 million years ago, ready to transform humanity into something else, something that fits their design parameters, something that can survive what they're planning for Earth's next phase. She closed the tablet and looked directly into my eyes. Still want to tell everyone? Still think humanity deserves to know that we're not the pinnacle of evolution, that we're livestock being prepared for harvest, that our entire civilization exists only because something ancient and incomprehensible decided to plant us here and wait for us to ripen? Because that's the truth, Mr. Hallowell. That's what your uncle died trying to warn you about. And that's what we've been desperately trying to figure out how to prevent, or at least mitigate before it becomes inevitable. So welcome to Antarctica. Welcome to the end of everything you thought you knew about human existence. I hope you're ready for what comes next. The plane climbed higher, and the clouds closed in around us, and I sat there holding an envelope full of documents that suddenly seemed woefully incomplete. Inadequate to prepare anyone for what Kensington had just described, and somewhere far below, beneath kilometers of ice that was melting faster every year, 63 massive structures were warming up, preparing for a harvest that had been planned before humans built their first cities, before we invented writing or agriculture or any of the things we thought made us special. The entities were waking, and we were running out of time to decide whether to face that awakening together, informed and prepared, or separately, ignorant and panicked. I thought about Desmond dying in that hospice bed, covered in geometric scars that were actually maps, instructions, warnings written on his skin by exposure to something he could never fully understand. And I realized that in 48 hours, those same warnings might be written on my skin too, might be written on everyone's skin if Kensington was right about the timeline, might be the last thing humanity saw before we stopped being human at all. The flight to Antarctica had begun, and there was no turning back now. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.